Real Estate News Report, June 4, 2026. 1. Seller pullback shakes spring market. Homeowners hit the brakes on listings. Across the United States, frustrated home sellers are withdrawing properties from the market at the fastest clip since the early pandemic freeze. A startling reversal that has real estate watchers sounding alarms. New data show 5.8% of all home listings were pulled off the market in April, tying the record set in March 2020 when the world first locked down. Rising mortgage rates, combined with economic jitters and even elevated gasoline prices, have dampened buyer demand, removing sellers' once rosy expectations of bidding wars and sky-high offers. Many sellers are simply not getting the prices they anticipated and are responding by hitting the eject button on their listings, a phenomenon that's intensifying just as the peak spring selling season, historically the busiest time for real estate, draws to a close. CNBC. The scope of the pullback is nationwide, but more pronounced in once sizzling Sunbelt and coastal markets where exuberance reigned in recent years. Atlanta led the nation with roughly 1 in 10 listed homes being yanked off the market in April, followed closely by tech-heavy San Jose, 9%, then Los Angeles, 7.8%, Dallas, 7.8%, and Seattle, 7.7%, according to Redfin. In these regions, sellers are no longer firmly in the driver's seat, as higher borrowing costs have sidelined buyers and put a chill on bidding wars. At open houses that once attracted frenzied crowds, real estate agents now report a more subdued atmosphere and even price reductions, though many homeowners remain stubborn about getting top dollar and would rather retreat than accept a bargain bid. A Redfin agent said buyers today know they have negotiating power for the first time in years, but some sellers just won't budge, preferring to delist and wait for a better market. CNBC. +1. CNBC. The dramatic rise in delistings underscores a shift from a red-hot seller's market to one where leverage is more balanced, if not tilting toward buyers. Home prices on the whole have softened somewhat from last year's record highs, though they remain higher than a year ago in most areas, even showing signs of stabilizing or upticking again in some markets. Inventory is beginning to build in certain regions as new listings accumulate and older ones linger unsold. Realtors note that while many buyers are discouraged, a slim cohort is still out hunting, and indeed pending home sales inched up 1.4% nationally in April, evidence of at least some pent-up demand that persists amid the slowdown. As the crucial spring selling season winds down with more of a whimper than a bang, an open question looms: will conditions improve by next year's spring, or is this retreat a lasting new reality for a post-boom housing market? CNBC. CNBC. +1. Subtopic: Atlanta's vanishing listings. In Metro Atlanta, the sudden chill is especially palpable, providing a case study of how quickly a blazing market can turn. Roughly 10% of home sellers in Atlanta pulled their listings in April, by far the highest share in the nation. Local agents recall just a year ago Atlanta's open houses overflowed with prospective buyers, but now many sellers face only silence or lowball bids. "I had my dream home listed for 2 months with no takers," laments one Atlanta homeowner who decided to take her property off the market after mortgage rates jumped. Some sellers are opting to rent out their homes rather than sell below their target price, while others simply refuse to negotiate, convinced that relief will come. This push-pull has created a stalemate, with inventory stagnating and a sense of limbo replacing last year's urgency. Industry veterans in Atlanta say it's as if the market slammed from full throttle to idle overnight, a jarring slowdown their town hasn't experienced since the 2008 era. Yet, with a strong local job market and population growth still underway, optimists argue this pause may be temporary, likening it to a spacecraft orbiting while awaiting better conditions to re-enter the atmosphere of a more balanced market. CNBC. 2. Easing mortgage rates, steady buyer freeze. Why demand hasn't lifted off. Mortgage rates have finally dipped from their peak, but home buyers remain largely grounded, hesitant to launch into the market despite slightly cheaper financing. The average rate for a 30-year fixed mortgage fell to 6.57% last week, down modestly from 6.65%, according to Mortgage Bankers Association data. It's the second time this year that rates flirted with the mid-6% range after breaching 7% previously. Economists note that easing energy costs and a bit of calmer news out of the turbulent Middle East have helped bond yields, and thus mortgage rates, inch lower in recent weeks. Yet this slight improvement was not enough to coax sidelined buyers into action. Mortgage applications for home purchases dropped 3% for the week, tumbling to their slowest pace since early spring. Refinancing activity likewise remained in the doldrums, down another 2%, hitting its lowest level since last summer. CNBC. Industry analysts describe potential buyers as skittish and fatigued, still grappling with affordability issues and uncertain about the near-term economic outlook. Mortgage rates are essentially flat now, says one mortgage banker, noting that even current homeowners aren't rushing to refinance at today's levels since rates, while below their peak, remain significantly above the ultra-low pandemic-era lows. The scant decline in interest rates was thus not enough to light a fire under demand, observed MBA economist Joel Kahn, who added that purchase applications are still almost 30% below where they were 2 years ago. Buyers face a multi-front battle: stubbornly high prices, only gradually softening in some markets, elevated rates doubling typical monthly payments compared to pre-2022, and still limited inventory in many places as would-be move-up sellers stay put. Meanwhile, lenders have tightened standards and a volatile economy, with a looming presidential election and global uncertainties, breeds caution. CNBC. The disconnect has many experts wondering what will finally bring buyers back en masse. Encouragingly, purchase loan demand is about 7% higher than the same week a year ago, when rates were even higher. That suggests a core of buyers stands ready to pounce once conditions improve just enough. Additionally, inflation has been cooling, which could eventually pave the way for more rate relief. Bonds could react strongly to upcoming data like the monthly jobs report, and any sign of the Federal Reserve pausing or cutting rates might spark enthusiasm. For now, however, prospective buyers remain on the sidelines, watching and waiting. The housing market appears to be in a holding pattern, like a rocket on the launch pad, fueled and prepared but waiting for clear skies before takeoff. CNBC. No subtopic for this section. 3. We have a housing crisis. Washington wakes up to affordability emergency. After years of surging prices and diminishing supply, the nation's housing affordability crunch has reached a boiling point that even Washington can no longer ignore. Leaders on Capitol Hill and in the White House are acknowledging a full-blown housing crisis, signaling potential action on a problem decades in the making. We have a housing crisis in this country, declared Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester bluntly during an interview this week, emphasizing the urgency for federal intervention. Policymakers are grappling with how to stimulate home construction, assist cost-burdened renters, and ease barriers to homeownership for millennials and working families increasingly locked out of the market. In a landmark move, the U.S. House of Representatives recently passed a housing affordability bill aimed at boosting supply and providing relief to struggling renters. The bill, a rare bipartisan effort in today's polarized climate, would devote billions of dollars to subsidize new affordable housing development, streamline zoning regulations, and expand down payment assistance for first-time buyers. While its fate in the Senate remains uncertain, the legislation's advancement reflects a new consensus in Washington. Addressing housing costs is now a national economic priority. CNBC. Fueling this urgency are stark new findings that illustrate the depth of America's housing shortage and affordability woes. The White House's annual economic report of the president, released last month, estimates the U.S. is short roughly 10 million housing units needed to meet demand. The report calls this massive deficit both a political risk and an opportunity, laying out a blueprint for reducing regulatory red tape and incentivizing builders to deliver more homes, all to stabilize prices and help the middle class. Even the President's Council of Economic Advisors chimed in with suggestions, scaling back onerous local zoning laws, reforming building codes, and linking federal infrastructure dollars to pro-housing policies, among other ideas. At the same time, macroeconomic jitters have weighed on confidence. Rapidly rising interest rates since 2022 revealed just how stretched buyers were. With home prices up 82% since 2000, but incomes only 12% higher in that period. Across the country, housing costs have soared out of proportion to wages, and what was once predominantly a coastal or big city issue has become a truly national concern. From skyrocketing rents in small heartland towns to rampant homelessness in West Coast cities. Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera. +1. With a presidential election approaching, housing affordability is emerging as a pivotal campaign issue. Incumbent President Donald Trump, who faces pressure to fulfill promises of an economic boom, has publicly acknowledged the housing pinch, but struck a controversial tone, saying he doesn't want to drive housing prices down because he aims to protect existing homeowners' equity. Meanwhile, opposition voices and advocates argue that prioritizing high home values over affordability is misguided when an entire generation can't afford to buy or even rent comfortably. The renewed focus on housing is offering a glimmer of hope for long-suffering renters and frustrated would-be buyers. Analysts caution that progress depends on political will and cooperation across federal, state, and local governments, a tall order akin to launching a moonshot for housing. But with crisis conditions clear, the stars may finally be aligning for a serious assault on America's housing affordability challenges. Al Jazeera. +1. Subtopic: Shortfall by the numbers. How severe is the U.S. housing shortage? By some measures, it is staggering. If home building had kept pace with historical norms after the 2008 financial crisis, the nation would have roughly 10 million more homes today than it does. This shortfall, outlined in the recent White House economic report, reflects a decade of underbuilding relative to population growth, pushing prices up and leaving many prospective homeowners with nowhere to go. Home prices nationally have climbed about 82% since 2000, far outpacing Americans' income growth of just 12% in that span. In effect, housing has become dramatically less affordable for the typical family over the past generation. These stark figures have lit a fire under policymakers, who are now urgently debating how to build millions more homes and close the gap. Blueprints for action include slashing the bureaucrat tax, the piling on of fees and rules that add an estimated $100,000 or more to the cost of building a typical house, and tying federal resources to local pro-housing reforms. It's a daunting challenge, but the consensus is that closing the housing supply gap is essential to get prices under control and make that fundamental piece of the American dream, an affordable home, attainable for the next generation. Al Jazeera. +1. Al Jazeera. 4. New York's rent-freeze showdown. Tenants cheer, landlords fear proposed cap. In New York City, a high-stakes battle is brewing over a bold plan to freeze rents for about 1 million rent-stabilized apartments, a move aimed at giving tenants a breather after years of breathless increases. The idea, championed by upstart politician Zoran Mamdani, now a mayoral hopeful, is electrifying a city where renters vastly outnumber owners and housing anxiety runs high. Mamdani's rent freeze proposal would effectively lock regulated rents at current levels for a year or more, putting a pause on annual rent hikes that landlords have long counted on. Tenant advocacy groups are fervently behind the plan, arguing that a freeze is necessary after record rent surges pushed many working-class New Yorkers to the brink of displacement during the post-pandemic housing crunch. People simply can't keep up. This freeze is a lifeline for millions of renters, one activist proclaimed at a recent rally on the steps of City Hall, where chants of "housing is a human right" echoed beneath the skyscrapers. With average Manhattan rents still hovering near all-time highs and the vacancy rate minuscule for affordable units, proponents see a freeze as a matter of survival for the city's middle and lower-income residents. But what cheers renters terrifies many property owners. Landlord organizations are pushing back hard, warning that an across-the-board rent freeze could devastate small building owners and ultimately boomerang on tenants if maintenance is deferred or properties fall into disrepair. Some point to decades of experience with rent control and stabilization in New York as proof of unintended consequences when price controls get too strict. A recent report by a budget watchdog group found that a temporary rent freeze wouldn't spell doom for most landlords financially, since larger owners have enjoyed rising profits in recent years, but acknowledged that smaller landlords with slim margins could struggle to cover expenses. City officials, including some on the Rent Guidelines Board that sets annual increases, are caught in a political vice. Do they appease incensed tenants or heed warnings that buildings will suffer and housing quality will erode? New York's struggle encapsulates a broader national debate as housing costs soar. Is aggressive rent regulation the solution to an affordability crisis or a cure worse than the disease? Public hearings about the proposed freeze, held this week, have drawn emotional testimony from both sides. Tenants wept as they recounted choosing between rent and food or crowding multiple families into one apartment to make ends meet. Landlords, including immigrant mom-and-pop owners who rely on rental income, pleaded that they face higher taxes, rising utility bills, and costlier repairs that fixed rents won't cover. Meanwhile, an alternate plan has surfaced to exempt the most distressed landlords from the freeze, aiming to differentiate between corporate owners with deep pockets and individuals who own just one or two buildings. City economists argue that most landlords can weather a short freeze, as New York's regulated rents have increased steadily over decades, giving owners significant equity cushion. Still, some small landlords insist a freeze might push them into default. The rhetoric is heated, but both camps agree on one thing: New York's rental market is at a breaking point. Whatever the outcome, it's likely to reverberate beyond Gotham as other cities consider similar measures to tackle rent spikes and protect residents. A terrestrial struggle that in many ways mirrors humanity's eternal challenge of balancing limited resources, fairness, and survival in a crowded habitat. Subtopic: Fears of the freeze. Not everyone is convinced a rent freeze would be benign. Small landlords describe being at a breaking point already, facing unpaid pandemic-era arrears, rising maintenance costs, and property taxes. They worry that freezing rents could tip marginal buildings into financial distress, particularly those run by families or retirees without vast reserves. My heating bills went up 20%. Insurance is up. Everything's up except rent. How am I supposed to keep up? Asked one Bronx landlord at a recent forum, his voice quavering with frustration. Some property owners caution that squeezing their income will only hasten the deterioration of aging housing stock as they defer repairs to stay afloat. Already, anecdotes of building neglect are surfacing. A Queens tenant in a small walk-up testified of a leaking roof unfixed for months, and her landlord confided in her that she simply lacks funds for a new boiler. Policymakers are exploring targeted relief for such cases, perhaps tax abatements or hardship exemptions, if a freeze is enacted. The challenge in New York is striking a balance: how to provide renters relief without inadvertently sparking a wave of boarded-up buildings. The stakes are high, but many see a path forward in creative compromises, like carving out exceptions for truly pressed owners while still delivering a freeze for the majority. As this debate unfolds in the city that never sleeps, other urban centers watch closely, aware that New York's experiment with a rent freeze could be a beacon or a cautionary tale for housing policy nationwide. 5. Trouble in Paradise. Florida's housing boom faces economic storm warnings. Florida's red-hot real estate market, supercharged by an influx of affluent migrants and investors in recent years, is suddenly flashing warning signs as economic fundamentals catch up with the Sunshine State's housing party. A new analysis pegs Florida as home to 12 of the nation's 50 riskiest housing markets for potential price declines in the near future. The data firm Adams' first quarter 2026 risk report flagged numerous Florida counties as being highly vulnerable to a housing downturn, surpassing even high-cost California and Rust Belt states traditionally seen as precarious. The top risk spot in the country went to Florida's Charlotte County, Punta Gorda area, thanks to a toxic mix of eroding affordability, above-average unemployment, and a growing share of homeowners with underwater mortgages, owing more than their homes are worth. Other Florida locales high on the risk list include vacation and retirement havens along the Gulf and Atlantic coasts that experienced frenzied demand in 2021 to 2022, only to see rising interest rates and insurance costs now threaten the sustainability of their price surges. Analysts say Florida's explosive growth and heavy reliance on second home buyers and relocations have left some markets overextended. Even as South Florida pulled in record luxury sales during the post-pandemic boom, economic storm clouds, from potential hurricanes to rising layoffs, could put those sky-high valuations to the test. Realtor. +1. Realtor. The Florida findings underscore a broader trend. After a period where the sun shone on many housing markets, the U.S. housing landscape is now splitting into winners and losers based on local fundamentals. Many of Florida's vulnerable counties also share traits like high foreclosure rates and significant income inequality, making them more susceptible if the national economy wobbles. For instance, even as Miami's real estate remains robust due to global wealth and cash buyers, smaller communities without diversified job bases or with many heavily mortgaged homeowners are on shakier ground. There's also Florida's perennial wildcard, climate and insurance risk. Skyrocketing insurance premiums and recent catastrophic storms have dented confidence in some coastal markets, leading a few national insurers to stop writing new policies in the state entirely. That one-two punch of higher borrowing costs and soaring insurance bills means some Florida homeowners are stretched thin, just as their property values look poised to plateau or dip. It's a classic late-cycle scenario. Those who bought at peak prices with little cushion could be left high and dry if values recede. Realtor. CNBC. Still, Florida is hardly alone in facing these pressures, and some experts counsel calm. The overall U.S. housing market remains relatively tight, and no one is predicting a nationwide crash on the scale of 2008. Demand for Florida real estate hasn't disappeared. Sunny weather and low taxes continue to lure residents and businesses, providing a floor under values in many areas. But the era of unsustainable double-digit price growth appears to be over, replaced by a more cautious, uneven outlook. Markets in California and New York also populate the high-risk list, largely due to terrible affordability and tenuous employment pictures in some counties. In California, 4 of the 5 least affordable counties in America are in the Golden State, where median home prices often exceed $700,000 and typical residents would need to spend 90% or more of their income on housing to buy in, an impossible proposition. These findings suggest that even as some regions remain expensive, the housing market's foundation is only as strong as households' ability to pay. Florida's meteoric housing boom may not quite be crashing back to earth, but it is undeniably encountering turbulence, a gentle reminder that, even in paradise, gravity still applies. Realtor. Subtopic: California's affordability abyss. As Florida faces risk from overextended buyers, California's housing crisis remains defined by extreme unaffordability that shows little sign of abating. 4 of the 5 U.S. counties where homeownership requires the largest share of income are in California, places like Santa Cruz County, Marin County, and Orange County, where the median home price now soaks up 90% or more of a typical resident's wages. In famously pricey Kings County, New York, Brooklyn, owning a home can consume an astonishing 109% of a household's annual income on average, but even that pales in comparison to the worst in California. No wonder California's population has begun to shrink as residents seek affordable refuge elsewhere and communities struggle with the outflow. The inability of local economies to provide housing anywhere near aligned with local pay is a structural problem decades in the making, driven by supercharged demand, constrained geography, and strict regulations. Experts warn that unless dramatic changes are made, such as permitting far more housing density, the affordability gap will continue to widen. The long-term consequences are already visible. Essential workers are priced out of the cities they serve, commutes lengthen, and companies worry about talent flight. But glimmers of hope exist. The state has begun pushing through zoning reforms to encourage more building, and creative solutions like modular construction and public-private partnerships are gaining traction. For now, though, California remains a cautionary tale of what happens when housing ascends into the stratosphere beyond reach of the everyday family. Realtor. 6. San Francisco's lunatic housing gold rush. AI wealth fuels a frenzied comeback. San Francisco's real estate market has gone from bust to boom in record time, whipsawing from despair to euphoria as a tsunami of new tech wealth bids up homes to jaw-dropping heights. Just 2 years after headlines blared about the city's doom loop, soaring office vacancies, fleeing residents, plunging home prices, the city by the bay is once again a bonanza for sellers. San Francisco homebuyers have officially lost their minds, quips one local agent only half-jokingly, as properties are now routinely fetching hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars over asking. Case in point, in a normally modest West Side neighborhood, a family offered $300,000 above the $1.3 million listing price on a house, only to be blown out of the water by a winning bid of $1.86 million. Bidding wars reminiscent of the dot-com era have erupted, except this time the frenzy is heavily fueled by an AI boom, a sudden concentration of extreme wealth tied to artificial intelligence startups, lucrative IPOs, and venture capital riches. OpenAI, SpaceX, Anthropic, and a host of other companies are either going public or minting newly wealthy employees, and many of those windfall beneficiaries are pouring cash into San Francisco homes as fast as they can. AOL. +1. The result is a fantastical spectacle. In some cases, homes are selling for double their asking prices, particularly in historically undervalued areas that techies now covet for their relative affordability and quality of life. Once sleepy outer Sunset or Parkside streets, known for fog and salt-weathered bungalows, have seen unhinged price contests as newly minted millionaires duke it out for scarce homes, driving values into orbit and returning San Francisco to its title as America's most expensive housing market, with citywide prices up roughly 15% in just the past year. Longtime observers say this cycle feels different from previous booms. It's more concentrated at the high end and compressed in time. Tech layoffs hammered the city in 2022 and 2023, and the population shrank. Now some of those trends have flipped seemingly overnight, proving remarkably how quickly people were to write off San Francisco only to be proven wrong. As one veteran realtor noted with a mix of irony and relief, the tech engine revving up underneath this rebound appears potent and potentially self-sustaining, with a wave of stock-rich buyers poised to flood the market further once impending IPOs hit. AOL. +1. Beneath the fireworks, however, lies a deeply uneven recovery, a K-shaped dynamic where the ultra-wealthy thrive while average families are left behind. San Francisco's comeback is largely a tale of the luxury segment. In the priciest neighborhoods, prices have surged over 13% since 2022, whereas in more affordable areas, if anything under $1 million can be called that, prices are still down about 4% year over year. The city continues to build housing at a snail's pace, leaving limited inventory and near-zero vacancy for those new tech titans to fight over. At open houses in No Valley and Pacific Heights, sports cars idle outside as buyers with stock option fortunes tour properties guardedly. On the other end of town, middle-class renters worry that the bounce back will eventually bring more gentrification and rent hikes to their neighborhoods too. The divergent fortunes highlight trends seen nationally: high earners shrugging off inflation and interest rates while everyone else tightens belts. But many in San Francisco find solace that the narrative has flipped from doom back to boom. "It's nice to see our city bounce back," says a veteran broker, reflecting confidence that the Bay Area's unique mix of innovation and natural beauty remains a magnetic force. For better or worse, San Francisco's housing market is reaching for the stars once again, a rocket-fueled ride powered by speculative AI dreams and a reminder that, at least in this corner of the country, the future can arrive in a hurry. AOL. +1. AOL. Subtopic: From Bust to Boom. A trophy home's wild ride. No story captures San Francisco's whiplash turnaround better than the saga of 2626 Larkin Street, a 6-bedroom Russian Hill mansion with sweeping bay views. In January 2020, near the market's previous peak, this luxury home sold for $20 million, epitomizing the city's lofty pre-pandemic values. But by late 2023, after tech layoffs and remote work relocations battered the market, the same house changed hands for a mere $10 million. An astonishing 50% drop that made national headlines as a symbol of San Francisco's fall from grace. Yet just 2 years later, as AI fervor infused new demand, 2626 Larkin roared back and sold again in April 2026, this time for a staggering $24 million. The property not only reclaimed its pre-COVID value but exceeded it, turning a massive profit for the brave buyer who had scooped it up during the downturn. Such reversals were once unthinkable in so short a time frame. Agents say comps, recent comparable sales, are practically useless in this warp-speed market, where values leap within months instead of years. It's as if an entirely new housing cycle played out in miniature, compressing a boom, bust, and rebound into half a decade. For homeowners who held their nerve through the slump, the vindication is sweet. For those who left at the bottom, the speed of the rebound is mind-boggling. But as one longtime market watcher cautions, what goes up fast can come down fast. Fortunes can turn on a dime here. In other words, San Francisco's dizzying ride isn't for the faint of heart, and the next big twist might be just around the corner. AOL. 7. Texas tech exodus bursts a housing bubble. Dallas suburbs reckon with reality. In the northern suburbs of Dallas, Texas, a housing boom that seemed unstoppable has suddenly run out of rocket fuel, brought down to earth by shifting immigration winds and tech industry turmoil. For over a decade, towns like Frisco, Prosper, and Salina flourished, their sprawling new subdivisions filled largely by Indian tech professionals on H-1B visas drawn to burgeoning corporate campuses, good schools, and Texas spacious living. South Asian buyers reportedly comprised as much as 70% of sales for some luxury builders at the height of the frenzy. But now, that engine of demand is sputtering. Silicon Valley layoffs have spread to local tech hubs, and a crackdown on H-1B visa rules, higher fees, stricter requirements, and allegations of fraud has thrown many would-be buyers into limbo or sent them packing. Home sales have slowed to a crawl, inventories of unsold new houses are swelling, and prices in some formerly scorching neighborhoods are sliding as the tech diaspora retrenches. According to Redfin data cited by Bloomberg, home prices in Collin County, north of Dallas, fell nearly 9% year-over-year in February, more than double the decline in the broader metro area. It's a dramatic reversal for communities that were mainlining growth just a couple of years ago. It's like someone turned off the tap, says a Dallas realtor who specialized in working with H-1B clients now nervously eyeing their expiring visas. First Post. +1. First Post. The North Texas housing hiccup underscores how deeply intertwined immigration and housing have become in certain growth markets. The surge of skilled Indian workers moving into these suburbs didn't just fill homes, it transformed local culture too. In Frisco, which locals nicknamed Dallasporum, the Indian share of population soared from around 6% to 20% in about a decade. New temples, mosques, Indian grocery stores, and restaurants opened, reflecting a thriving community that bolstered housing and the economy. Now those same neighborhoods face an unsettling pause. Tradition Homes, a high-end builder, saw its South Asian buyer share plunge from 70% of sales to below 30%, leaving it with more than 100 unsold luxury houses waiting for takers. Many tech families are delaying home purchases or even considering selling at a loss as uncertainty clouds their job and visa status. Real estate agents recount heart-wrenching scenarios. A software engineer couple forced to abandon their Texas dream home and return to India after layoffs, or landlords suddenly flooded with former would-be buyers now looking to rent. Until things settle down. First Post. +1. First Post. Housing analysts caution that Dallas experience could foreshadow similar turbulence in other tech-centric U.S. markets reliant on foreign talent. Suburban enclaves in Northern Virginia, Seattle, and Raleigh, all places where H-1B visa holders fueled growth, may face parallel headwinds if visa policies tighten nationwide. For Texas, the broader outlook isn't entirely bleak. The Dallas-Fort Worth region still boasts a diversified economy and historically resilient real estate demand from domestic migration and corporate relocations. Yet the saga is a sobering reminder of how quickly hyperlocal housing bubbles can deflate when their primary fuel source is cut off. The hope among builders and city planners is that any downturn will be moderate and temporary. Some see opportunity in the slowdown. Lower prices and more inventory could allow local first-time buyers, long priced out, a chance to enter the market. For a region that soared like a rocket on the tailwind of tech immigration, this is a forced re-entry to a more stable trajectory, a painful adjustment now, but potentially a return to more sustainable growth after the froth has settled. First post. Subtopic: Dallasporum, no more. Over the past 10-plus years, North Texas became an unexpected cultural melting pot, with Indian professionals reshaping the local fabric as much as the housing market. The strong community presence earned Frisco nicknames like Little India or Dallasporum as South Asian festivals filled parks and new temples and Indian grocery stores sprang up amid the strip malls. Local leaders celebrated the diversity and the economic dynamism it brought. The Dallas Metro led the nation in corporate headquarters relocations since 2018, often on the strength of its skilled immigrant workforce. But as H-1B visa uncertainty intensifies, those communities face newfound anxiety. At a recent town hall, one resident spoke of how her cul-de-sac, once buzzing with the chatter of several Indian families, has seen 2 households abruptly depart in the last 6 months, their dreams cut short by lost jobs and expiring visas. Neighborhood schools that benefited from an influx of high-achieving kids and engaged parents now worry about enrollment dips if the exodus continues. Still, there's resilience. Local Indian associations are rallying to provide support, from job networking to visa advice, hoping to help more families stay rooted. The hope in Frisco is that the pause is temporary and that a more balanced, inclusive growth will resume. After all, many believe the factors that attracted these families, quality of life, opportunity, community, remain. If the tech sector stabilizes and immigration finds clarity, North Texas could once again see its American dream, with a Desi twist, narrative continue. For now, the giant new houses in Frisco's subdivision stand as symbols of both an extraordinary success story and the fragility that comes when a local boom is built on global forces beyond its control. First post. 8. Commercial real estate crunch. Office towers sell at a loss as cities reimagine downtowns. America's commercial property sector is grappling with an unprecedented shakeout, as downtown office buildings and other once prized assets endure steep losses and owners scramble to adapt to new post-pandemic realities. In a striking example of the turmoil, investment giant Blackstone is set to sell one of Seattle's landmark skyscrapers at a roughly 54% loss from its purchase price just a few years ago. The company's agreed sale of the 44-story U.S. Bank Center for about $280 million, far below the $612 million it paid in 2019, highlights how dramatically remote work and higher interest rates have ravaged office values. Similar distress is evident coast to coast. In San Francisco, New York, Chicago, and beyond, office vacancy rates have surged to record levels, forcing landlords to refinance debt on less favorable terms or even face foreclosure. The pain isn't confined to offices. Overextended investors in apartment complexes are feeling the squeeze too. One of Texas' largest multifamily landlords, S2 Capital, recently had nearly $560 million in apartment loans sent to special servicing due to financial stress, and one of its Dallas properties entered foreclosure. These scenarios were almost unimaginable a few short years ago, when cheap money and booming demand made commercial real estate a darling of investors. But with the work-from-home era drastically reducing office demand and interest rates at decade highs, a moment of reckoning is at hand for overleveraged players. Yahoo! +1. Cities impacted by empty offices and hollowed-out business districts are racing to pivot. Downtowns that thrived on daily foot traffic from commuters now face the challenge of reinvention: how to fill vacant towers and keep urban cores vibrant. A patchwork of creative solutions is emerging. In Midtown Manhattan, some landlords are upgrading older office buildings into luxury apartments or hotels, a process fraught with cost and zoning hurdles, but seen as a potential outlet for obsolete commercial spaces. Elsewhere, smaller cities like Syracuse, New York are seeing outside developers plan transformations. One project aims to convert a vacant downtown Syracuse office building into 46 apartments, bringing much-needed housing and helping revitalize the heart of the city. It's a win-win if done right, alleviating housing shortages while curing office vacancies, but the process can be complex and expensive, requiring government incentives, rezoning, and imaginative design. Meanwhile, public officials are debating how to coax workers back to partially empty central business districts, at least part-time, to support shops and restaurants. Some companies like banks and tech firms have mandated stricter return-to-office policies this year, a trend that if sustained might boost occupancy somewhat. But few expect a full return to the old 5-day office routine. The future of the American downtown likely involves more mixed-use flexibility, a blend of residential, office, and recreational uses that can weather shifts in work habits. Despite the dire headlines of big losses, market optimists see opportunity in the crisis. Commercial real estate historically runs in cycles, and the current downturn, while painful, could clear the way for a healthier rebalance. Investors with dry powder are hunting for bargains. For instance, opportunistic buyers are snapping up troubled office loans at a discount, betting on eventual stabilization. Developers also note that some aging office towers are ripe for cost-effective repurposing. Not every building can become apartments, but those that can find new life might lead the way in urban transformation. Local governments from New York to San Francisco are offering incentives like tax breaks to encourage office conversions and stimulate downtown residential growth. Meanwhile, sectors like industrial warehouses and data centers remain robust in many regions, partly offsetting the pain in office and retail segments. The message is clear: commercial real estate must adapt or decline. As one consultant put it, "We're witnessing the biggest reshuffling of urban real estate since the 1970s, but unlike that era's flight to suburbs, today's challenge is to innovate our cityscapes to make them more resilient." The hope is that out of this shakeout, more vibrant, diversified downtowns will eventually emerge, an evolution reminiscent of how, in exploration, old stars fade while new ones are born to guide the way forward. Subtopic: Reinventing a downtown. In many cities, empty office buildings are gradually being reimagined as housing, injecting new residents into central business districts that once went dark after 6 p.m. In Syracuse, New York, a striking example is underway. An out-of-state developer has acquired a defunct downtown office block and plans to convert it into 46 modern apartments, complete with street-level retail. Local officials hail this project as a template for revitalization, turning a liability, vacant offices, into an asset, much-needed urban housing. State incentives and streamlined approvals helped make the unusual conversion feasible, anticipating that new downtown residents will support nearby businesses year-round. Experts caution that not every high-rise can become condos. Architectural and financial barriers persist, but Syracuse's approach demonstrates the art of the possible. On the West Coast, San Francisco and Los Angeles have begun similar experiments on a larger scale. Even New York City's planners are eyeing mid-century office towers for residential reuse in areas like Lower Manhattan. The trend of adaptive reuse is gaining momentum as a sustainable, community-friendly solution to the commercial real estate slump. While not a panacea for every empty skyscraper, these pioneering projects show that with creativity and policy support, downtowns can adapt to changing times. The apartments rising from old cubicles illustrate a hopeful vision of post-pandemic cities, more livable, 24/7 neighborhoods that blur the line between where we work and live. Much like space stations repurposing every module for efficiency and survival. Google. 9. Digital gold rush. Real estate capital fuels a $5 trillion AI data center boom as artificial intelligence reshapes the economy. One unexpected sector is emerging as a key player in powering the revolution: real estate investors. In a new report, Goldman Sachs predicts private infrastructure and real estate capital will play an increasingly central role in financing an enormous global expansion of data centers and AI infrastructure. The numbers are eye-popping. Goldman boosted its capex forecast for the four U.S. tech giants, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Google, to a staggering $5.3 trillion combined over the next 5 years. Money largely earmarked for building out cloud computing capacity. With such colossal funding needs, corporations are reaching beyond traditional funding sources. More of the tab will be picked up by private investors, including real estate and infrastructure funds hungry for new opportunities, blurring the line between what counts as a real estate investment. Data centers, essentially the high-tech warehouses of the digital age, occupy land, require massive buildings, and consume vast power, fitting naturally into the portfolios of real estate trusts and developers. Goldman's note explicitly states that private infrastructure and real estate will play an even larger role in meeting the scale of AI's growth. U.S. News. +1. U.S. News. This trend highlights how the definition of real estate is evolving in the 21st century. Traditional real estate investors, from pensions to private equity, have long funded office towers, shopping malls, and apartment complexes. Now they're turning to server farms and fiber optic cables, enticed by the stable, utility-like income data centers can provide and the protection against inflation these assets offer. One industry insider described data centers as the new real estate frontier, not unlike how railroads or highways were in past generations, crucial infrastructure needing capital. Even insurance companies and sovereign wealth funds are diving in, partnering with tech firms or buying stakes in data center operators. The convergence of real estate and tech is producing unique hybrids. Some property developers are incorporating data center components into larger projects, while others are carving out entirely new business lines to specialize in digital infrastructure. From Ashburn, Virginia, nicknamed Data Center Alley, to the deserts of the Southwest where new server farms sprout, the construction cranes are up and running to meet insatiable demand for the computing power behind AI innovations like advanced chatbots and autonomous systems. U.S. News. The significance of this boom goes beyond profit and portfolios. By channeling private capital into building the physical backbone of AI, the land, buildings, power systems, and cooling equipment that support billions of digital transactions, the real estate sector is inadvertently fueling technological progress. This blending of bricks and mortar financing with cutting-edge tech needs underscores how interconnected the modern economy has become. Real estate's structured, long-horizon investment approach meshes surprisingly well with the enormous upfront costs and long payback periods of data center projects. For investors, AI infrastructure promises a double benefit: solid, contract-backed returns over time plus exposure to one of the highest growth industries. It's a symbiotic relationship. And for society, these investments mean quicker rollout of AI capabilities, from cloud-based medical research to advanced satellite imagery analysis. In essence, real estate investors are helping build not just homes and offices, but the digital homes of artificial intelligence. The stakes are high and the sums immense, but if the vision holds, the reward is nothing short of a planetary-scale upgrade to our computing facilities. One analyst calls it the space race of our era, only it's data centers instead of rockets, and Wall Street is footing the bill. As this digital gold rush accelerates, the lines between real estate and technology continue to blur, forging a new frontier for investment and innovation alike. U.S. News. No subtopic for this section. 10. The final frontier of real estate, homes on the moon and the hope for tomorrow. While Earth's housing markets ebb and flow, an astonishing new horizon is coming into view. The first human habitats beyond Earth are beginning to take shape. In an era that has strained our capacity to provide affordable homes domestically, scientists, architects, and space agencies are busy designing and funding the construction of dwellings on the moon and beyond. applying the best of human ingenuity to build in the harshest environment imaginable. Just this past week, NASA announced nearly $1 billion in contracts to private companies to start building the infrastructure for a permanent lunar base by the end of this decade. For firms, including Blue Origin and 2 rover makers, have been tapped to develop lunar vehicles and robotic hoppers that will scout the moon's south pole for resources and stability, laying groundwork for eventual habitats. In another project, a Texas construction tech company called Icon, known on Earth for its 3D printed homes, has been working with NASA on large-scale 3D printers capable of using moon dust, regolith, to print structures on the lunar surface, a technology that could debut in coming years. These endeavors may sound like science fiction, but they're very real, funded and unfolding step by step, and they have already spurred breakthroughs in materials science and automation that are feeding back into Earthbound construction. Tech Times. +1. The fascination with space colonization has taken on new urgency as humanity grapples with climate change, population growth, and the need for sustainable development. Space architecture is no longer just an academic exercise. It's now a budding industry attracting top design firms and visionary architects keen to solve puzzles of off-world living. They're experimenting with closed-loop life support systems, radiation shielding through innovative use of local materials, and modular designs that can be adapted from lunar to Martian conditions. Interestingly, many of these technologies have direct applications back home. For example, 3D printing techniques pioneered for building on Mars or the Moon are being used to rapidly construct low-cost housing on Earth, potentially offering a solution to housing shortages in remote or disaster-hit regions. The synergy is clear. By pushing the envelope in space, we gain tools to improve construction and sustainability in our cities. It's a hopeful two-way street. As we build beyond Earth, we learn to build better at home. The symbolism of making real estate a multiplanetary concept resonates deeply in this era. It speaks to our species' resilience and imagination that even as we tackle housing crises on Earth, we dare to imagine thriving settlements on the Moon, Mars, and perhaps one day floating in space. Futurists suggest that by the 2030s, a small but growing cadre of humans may indeed call the lunar South Pole home, living in habitats printed from moon dust and powered by the sun. SpaceX and other companies are already selling tickets for flights around the moon, and visionaries like Elon Musk talk openly of building Mars colonies in the decades ahead. To some, these are more than technical projects. They are inspirational beacons of possibility for a world in need of optimism. Back on Earth, you can sense the mood shifting. Urban planners borrow language from science fiction, talking of self-sustaining cities and off-grid communities. Young architects reference the overview effect, that profound shift in perspective astronauts experience when seeing Earth from space, and apply it to designing human-centric, sustainable neighborhoods here on terra firma. In bridging Earth and space, the real estate sector is learning to think bigger and bolder. It's a reminder that no challenge is insurmountable if we harness creativity and technology in service of people. From breaking ground on new suburbs to breaking new ground on the moon, humanity's quest to build a better home continues, making us all pioneers on this final frontier of real estate. Tech Times. Disclaimer: this extensive report is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, medical, or professional advice. The news stories, data, and anecdotal accounts provided here are intended to inform and illustrate current trends in real estate and related fields. They should not be taken as guidance for any investment, health, legal, or personal decision. Please consult appropriate licensed professionals for advice on such matters. Remember that news is informative, not instructive. Always exercise your own judgment and due diligence, and never treat anecdotal stories as authoritative advice. Video description for YouTube. Journey through